Igama mnandi. Udlamini uziza ujama kasijadu fakade. I am the former chairperson of the Black Management Forum's Young Professionals in the Eastern Cape province. And I have been asked to facilitate tonight's session. I'm going to ask that we kindly take our seats. I'm going to ask the audiovisual team to assist us to connect to the live audience. And I'm going to ask that we kindly give respect to the author who is our guest here tonight by hopefully paying attention to the discussion that is about to take place and equally participating where necessary. We are living in COVID times. It becomes critical that we adhere to our COVID-19 regulations and public protocols. It is also going to be important that, as would be any public engagement, we try and keep our phones on silent so that we don't interrupt what is happening up front. All right, without further ado, I'd just like to thank you, and I'd just like to send out a sincere greeting and apology to our audience on the virtual platform. We have been experiencing some delays, but we are grateful that you still have made time on this important Thursday evening to partake in this conversation. This is indeed a conversation, and that conversation is also in the spirit of celebrating the Black Management Forum's 45th anniversary. The Black Management Forum is a thought leadership and managerial development advocacy organization that has been around for 45 years. Now, within our ambit of thought leadership and what has characterized the programming for this 45th anniversary year has been a series of reflective engagements and discussions with some of our greatest thought leaders in the country, and also a series of book launches that are beginning to recognize an emerging canon of young and old African authors who are very much South African, like many of us. What this is doing, obviously, is it's assisting us with the necessary appraisal of what it is to be Black in the world today. It is assisting us with the professional decorum that we must form, the entrepreneurial agency that we must revisit, that has always characterized our history as a people. No book does that more than Native Merchants, written here by Mr. Phakamisa Nzamela. Mr. Phakamisa Nzamela is originally from Mthatha. He comes from that lineage, Yoxaba. I'm going to read a quick biography of Mr. Phakamisa Nzamela here for you, because I know that many of us don't know our own authors, nor do we know our own professionals. Phakamisa Nzamela was born in Mthatha. He completed his schooling at Gladys King Primary School and Maria Zell High School in Mthatha, in Matatia. He holds a BA honors in journalism from University of the Witwatersrand. Phakamisa began his career as an intern and graduate trainee in Thomson Reuters in both Johannesburg and London. He is an award-winning business journalist and has written for MoneyWeb, Business Day, Financial Mail, the Financial Times in London, covering banks, insurance, private equity, and investment holding companies. He lives with his family in the Republic of Cape Town. He is passionate about the study of business history. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not alone here today. We do have our leadership. Mr. Nzamela insisted that we don't get the show on the road without the leadership here. I have to recognize and ask that President Andile Nomlala, no Deputy President Wetu Mamutaznim Frederick stand up, and we greet them this evening and welcome them as well to this session. Please, let's give them a round of applause. I have to pay tribute to the two of them before we start, Mr. Nzamela, because I think that the BMF that I am proud to belong to as a young person is the BMF that exposed me to the Young Professionals Development Program that trains young people and prepares them for the kind of society that I think your book is trying to get us to reimagine. And I think that if there's one thing that we must really be honest with ourselves about their term, which comes to an end, I believe, tomorrow, is that it has indeed reinvigorated the position of the BMF in public South Africa. Without a doubt, the BMF is a reputable and respected organization that through them also suddenly had an ability to appeal to the young voices who are often left out of many important decision-making conversations in our country. And I think if there's one thing that I'd like to recognize about their term and the collective effort of the board, it is that. Let's give them a round of applause. All right, Mr. Nzamela, welcome, Shagaz. I was also thrilled to find myself on the same shuttle as you today and get a chance to perhaps brainstorm what becomes of this discussion. I want to start here before I bring you in. The motivation for this book. By the way, the book is on sale here on display. And the objective of any book launch is that you must buy the book. We can talk here till we're blue in the face, but if you don't buy and read the book, we have missed the boat. Right, so he says here, one of the issues confronted in the text is the often repeated narrative in the post-liberation discourse of South Africa that the politically active and connected Black business class after 1994 emerged as enterprise owners solely because of their proximity to the governing African National Congress and its economic empowerment policies. While there is a correlation between individuals connected to the ANC emerging as a class of wealthy business people after 1994, it does not mean that this would not have happened without their membership or without the ANC assuming political power. The fact is the leadership of the ANC and its predecessor, the South African Native National Congress, was always petty bourgeoisie, to paraphrase one of its leaders, Khaobakwe Joe Matthews. The other factor is that historically, many leaders became wealthy before they joined the organization. The origins of SANEC have been narrowed down to an elite group of missionary-educated professionals and chiefs. But no deep scholarly work has ever been done to locate these people at a business level. Mr. Nzamela, you went to Mariazell. You got a missionary education. You are perhaps part of the petty bourgeoisie yourself. I want to reflect on, firstly, what inspires this book. And I want us to go back to Kwaqaba and give give the audience a mapping of Otaba within the context of this emerging Black elite, because there must be something that draws you closer to this narrative more than the interest of writing. Please just take us through those beginnings.
Thank you very much, Reverend Director. First, it taught me basic English. And I'm grateful to people such as Ndate and Daniel. Taught by Black people, total. Who were well trained. I'm grateful. So perhaps without Maria Zell and the missionary education, this project would have been.
All right, well, one of the interesting things about that missionary education is the work of none other than Sir George Grey. When we think about the establishment of the Lovedale Missionary Institute in 1841, one of the things that your book does is that it doesn't draw a conclusion as to what the thorough aims of the missionary education may have been, but it pays credit to their effectiveness in producing a certain caliber of educated class amongst the Blacks. But here's an interesting take by Sir George Grey. His plan was to start a facility that sought to combat superstition by promoting Christianity, to shake native faith in witchcraft, and those who practiced it by skilled medical aid, to overcome ignorance by native schools, and to counteract indolence by industrial training in various trades and by employment on works of public utility. Now, for me, it also is very symbolic that we find ourselves in a place like KZN, because one of the characters in your book you talk about comes from a missionary part of KZN. Do you want to reflect a bit about that?
Sure, thanks, Papama. Indeed, Christian education did play a role in producing a Black middle class, unapologetically so, and that is reflected in the text. However, we must equally imagine a Black middle class that was also not Christianed. So before the arrival of the Western methods of Christianity on the shores of what we call South Africa. Between the years 800 and 1300, on the banks of Umgeni River here in KwaZulu, in a place called KwaGandaganda, you had Zulu men mining copper, mining iron ore, mining coal, and they smelted it. This is not me imagining things. These are archaeologists that I reference and geologists who've gone out to those sites and found traces of mining activity and smelting activity in the period between 800 and 1300 here at KwaZulu on the banks of Ngeni River. Now, this is a pre-Western Christianized Black group of people that participates in heavy commercial activity. Of course, you might ask yourself, what were the resources used for? For the needs of the economy, for producing farming implements, and the surplus was exported, of course, in the Indian Ocean, the Sofala region. The biggest trade port then was Lake Kilwa, next to Tanzania. And they would be exported via Mozambique, Lake Kilwa, and sent to Asia in exchange for Oriental products. So that's the first part. The second part of the christened, you see, when the Black people lose their land, pregnant with mineral resources, they are forced, as Sir George Gray says, they are forced into these missionary schools, not by choice, but to proselytize them so that they become soft. Unfortunately, what the colonialists did not budget for is that the same missionary education creates a very radical Black Christian. You look at Sobukwe, you look at Steve Biko, you look at Mandela, you look at, I won't mention myself, I'm not radical. You look at a number of them, the people who started the ANC, they become radical, having been educated. So Christian education does the opposite, actually. But we must commemorate the Nembulas. You know, there's a family, first there were Kwabes of the Makanyas. In 1864, Nembula Makanya, who was 37 years old then, 1864, with his friend Naicha Namkwanas, they start a sugar production factory here in KwaZulu. They raise 500 pounds through a bond to buy a sugarcane mill. They were not waiting for handouts. Of course, then you are not even allowed to buy a stake. I'm not blaming it, but they did not wait to be selected as part of a consortium. They raised their own money, Ngaijana Mkwanazi and Nembula. In 1867, their product was sent to the Paris Commodity Exhibition. Such was the power of Mavuma Nembula and Ngaijana Mkwanazi. Of course, from a children perspective and the next generation, the Nembulas give birth to the second Western educated medical African doctor. And that is John Mavuma Nembula, who qualified in the US in 1888. John Mavuma Nembula came slightly after William Anderson Soga. So in the text, I say the Nembulas in the 1800s, mid 1800s, can only be compared to the Sogas.
All right. Well, one of the interesting things about the Nembulas and the internationalization of that class, if I can call it that, is that what you're beginning to see out of these characters is a kind of agency that is a kind of contextualizes itself at a global level. At some point, we will talk about Z.K. Matthews, right? And the kind of agency that informed his work. Is that something that you deliberately sought to bring out? Is there a recognition that this was not just an ordinary class of Africans, but also they had a kind of a worldly perspective to their insights?
Sure. I mean, you should remember the University of Forte is only started post-Union, that is post-1910. And one of the reasons why University of Forte started is to try and stop the native from going abroad. Because all these guys go to America and they get introduced to Garvey, to Du Bois, to Washington, and they come back radical. Just look at all the guys who went to America. So the colonial strategy was to limit their global outlook because they then brought back these radical things. I mean, you can look at Charlotte Manya. She was Charlotte Manya before she became Charlotte Maxeke. She had her own identity. She went to the US and she gets a Bachelor of Sciences and she comes back radical, of course. Some went to Scotland, some went to England. So it also cautions us that if people were to qualify in the 1870s in England, perhaps we need to seize as Black professionals this whole notion that says, I am first, when people did it way back.
Right. Well, so that earlier part of your book, you can give him a round of applause, yes. Well, that earlier part of your book does sort of address that link in the sort of 18th and 19th century, and perhaps even the 20th century. But there's an interesting point being made by a Governor Jansen. And we're talking here about the nature of these people. What motivates this group of Africans? What is their ethos? And he writes here that, well, he says, there is an enthusiastic propensity for business amongst these Kafirs. The cause for which appears to be due less to a desire to satisfy certain of their needs than greed and enrichment. So their motivation is not greed and enrichment. For the Kafir, everything is for sale. If a profitable deal is offered to him and only the disapproval of his father, his wife, or some other important person can restrain him from parting with one thing or another.
Sure.
He sells his daughter to the man who desires to marry her for the highest price, without the slightest regard for her inclination, and overlooks the adultery of his wife, if the affront he has suffered brings him in a few cows. Cattle is the foremost item of business, which the Kafirs at present still only conduct amongst themselves. What is happening to this man? What exactly is he instigating here?
You see, program director, you should have said quote unquote, because now the people here, you know, there's a boss of mine here who's thinking, is it me speaking like this? It's Jansen, it's not me, quote unquote. You see, Jansen was sent to South Africa, Jans, after, I think it was after the death of Yinta. And he was asked by the church, I think it was the London Missionary Society, to spend some time with the natives in the Eastern frontier, in the Eastern Cape. So when he sits, when he records those things, he's sat amongst the natives, largely the Xhosa and the Khoi, and he has seen how much of a value that they put on cattle. And he himself confesses that the native is not just about subsistence, but is about surplus too. Of course, where Jans gets it wrong is to think that a man can sell their daughter, because anybody who knows, and I try and correct him in the text, because anybody who knows the culture of Ilobola, if my daughter's hand is asked by whoever, and they bring cows as a form of building relations, that is not a sale of a commodity, because whoever marries my daughter, or if I'm married, I can never own the person that I'm married to, and I can never sell them, right? You can never sell your wife. So that is what the European misses in the concept of Ilobola. But he was correct on the native really chasing surplus. And then we can take it back to the Dutch East India Company, even the English East India Company program director. You know, in 1613, the English East India Company, which predates the Dutch East India Company of Antonich van Riebeeck, Jan van Riebeeck. There was Thomas Smythe from the city of London, Ace. Now, Thomas Smythe had arrived in South Africa in 1612, and he wanted to build a settlement for the English. And what does he do? He engages in public affairs, or what we call corporate affairs. He anoints or conferences with one of the chiefs of the Khoi, Chief Xhosa. They kidnap him, they take him to London as far back as 1613. And he stays in the city of London, not far from Grace Church. And they teach him English so that he can come back and open up Saldanha Bay, which was called Sultania by the Khoi, so that trade can be opened. Now, Khoi spends a year and he loses it. He says, I want to go back to Sultania now. They put him on a ship, he comes back to Cape Town. The first thing that he does is he takes off the shields. He was given shields, he was knighted there, but he takes them off. And he goes on conferences with his people. He says, guys, I don't know how they, you know, might have been somewhere, but trying to say that the copper and the brass that we exchange for our livestock is not taken seriously in London, because he had been there. Now, a diary is quoted here of an Anglican minister of religion, Reverend Edward Terry. Now, in his diary, Reverend Edward Terry, which he wrote around the 1613 period when he spent some time here in Cape Town, Reverend Edward Terry says, when Khoi came back from London, the livestock prices escalated, because Khoi had discovered that actually these guys needed to put more copper plate for the livestock. Now, what is that? Isn't that commerce?
Well, okay, so, okay, can we pause? Yeah. So I want us to now move a bit closer to home, because I think we've exhausted the early period, which also probably takes us through around the Great Depression, around the mining, around the Venda area, and further into perhaps the 40s, right? And I want to look at the agency of people like Champion,
Sure.
right? Champion is this kind of educated African, right? And he wants to bring about a kind of institutional outlook amongst Black people that organizes itself around finance, right?
Sure.
And finance, everyone in the room will know, is a very important lever of our economy in this day and age, especially in the neoliberal era. But what becomes evident, kule ncwadi yakho, Mhlakazi, is that finance actually recognized early on the importance of that stock farming that you were referring to just now, right? And through the agency of these churches, right, as kind of institutions of gathering of our people, builds the kinds of networks that have come to form what we know as stokvels, right? And creates thriving societies of savings amongst a Black elite. But there are some tensions, aren't there? There is an interesting clash between how do you keep the distance between a business interest and a political interest, right? I think that for an organization like BMF, that has become for me a very critical chapter, because it also, one might be forgiven for at some point thinking that you were praising the ANC in this book, because a lot of their characters kind of emerge in this story. But it was a recognition of the fact that these elite were interacting in those circles in any case, and the elite who formed the ANC were coming from those business circles, weren't they? So I'd like you to take us through the work of Champion.
Thanks, Program Director. And I'm going to deal with Champion now, but because the book is also multi-sectoral, I'll kindly beg you that we go back to mining so that people can understand why we have a mining charter today. But let us start with AWG Champion. He's also from this region. As you can imagine, they say he's champion, meaning he was christened himself. He had his own name that was not Champion. People can buy the book or research further to see who he was. Now, Alison Wessel's Champion is the president of the ANC in Natal, in the Natal colony. He works with Henry Selby Msimang, the exempted natives of Edendale, Amakholwa. I'm told there's a descendant here of the Msimangs. Msimang was Secretary General of the ANC in the Natal colony. What do? They were concerned that Black people did not have a financial institution that catered for their specific needs. So Champion and Msimang go around villages, trying to canvass for this isikhwama sesizwe. Msimang says in his narration, every time he arrived at a chief's kraal, there would be a slaughtering of the cow. He was an educated man. Msimangs went to Taunton, Somerset, right, in the 1800s. So you can imagine the excitement that came with Msimang coming to your house. And Msimang would say, no, man, this is waste. We need to do something. In 1945, in December 1945, Champion and Msimang start what is called isikhwama sesizwe, or Natal African Fund in English. And they raise deposits across the Natal colony. I want to give you a figure here. I didn't memorize it. You can, yeah. By 1950, sure. By 1950, you know, they had raised about 419 pounds. This is black people's money going into a self-created initiative. Again, not waiting for a stake somewhere. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's the way the economy has got to be transformed now. But these were self-starters. What happens? Of course, in the 50s, the narrative in the ANC changes. Champion is replaced by Chief Albert Luthuli. And there is a new cabal that wants to expropriate this isikhwama sesizwe and make it an ANC fund. Msimang and Champion pushed, of course, they were not re-elected when Luthuli went in. They wrestle with this thing and they win it from this faction of the ANC who wanted to expropriate it because they said, this is monies of ordinary people. You can't just come and raid a bank here, someone's purse, VBS style. You know, so, but what they did not budget for, as they wrestled it out of those comrades, the special branch visits them and says, but you guys are raising money to fund terrorist activities of the African National Congress. And the guys just lost steam, and the fund was transferred into the Luthuli Memorial Trust. Champion had tried to put it in the Bantu Investment Corporation, and the apartheid weapons were just against them. And that fund was absorbed by one of the trust funds, one of them being the Albert Luthuli Memorial Fund. Of course, that was not the financial institution pre-1945. In 1925, the African People's Organization of Dr. Abdullah Abdul Rahman in Cape Town, 1925, colored people in the majority, 250,000 pounds in the bank. And they used that money to fund business activities of black people and for them to acquire property and so on. You can go back to the 1800s. Reverend Mbangela started his own penny and savings institution, Ibandla Letopia, the Ethiopian Benefit Society. So we've always participated in financial services. Again, you must stop first.
Ladies and gentlemen, we must thank Mr. Nzamela because one of the things that the book highlights is that his work is really about deliberate engagement with history. A history, is it a history of finance? Is it a history of the economy? And particularly a history of the Black economy. I say that because the production of knowledge by Black people is not a common thing. And the canon of literature that we've seen in most cases has rather focused more on autobiographies, right? And not so much of it has delved and dug deep to say, who are we from a systematic point of view, from an organizational point of view, from an agency point of view. And I think that you credit, is it Patrick Brugger for triggering this interest?
Sure. So I was sitting in the newsroom at a business day, I think it was 2012, and we were clearing page one. I had happened to write page one, and Patrick Bulger comes back. It's about this time. He says, PK, why don't you write a biography about a contemporary businessman So we went around with a friend of mine, Lindo Kulu, interviewing all the Black businessmen that started businesses post 1994. You can imagine who they are. I don't need to mention them, they are in here. And the uniform view that came from all those interviewed people was that it was really unfair to critique and talk about BE without understanding the historical commercial activities of Black people in South Africa. It was a shambok, but it took another 7 years deep in the archive, mining those nuggets.
Well, I mentioned that point. Someone did highlight that I'm not audible. Can you hear me? Am I clear? Thank you. I mentioned this point, and we were launching Ayabonga Chawe's book the other day, and one of the panelists that we had in the room was a very respected business person in the Eastern Cape, a white business person. And he kept on saying, Ubana, you guys like focusing on the past, and you're going to miss out on the opportunities of the present. And we kept on having to remind him that for us, we have the Glenn Gray Act that was very instrumental against our race. We have apartheid as a policy itself. And so we're at 6s and 7s with ourselves. So if we're going to focus on the present and the future without an appraisal of how systematic the disentanglement and the out-organizing of our initiatives has been and how deliberate it has been, we are still going to be limping from pillar to post year on. And so what I appreciate about this text is that it draws us closer to an appreciation of those devices and how deliberate they were, right? Because the foreign affairs officer of the native land sort of was sent to the Cape to start imposing restrictions on Black enterprise, right? So there's a tension in the book. I think it's ZK Matthews, and I'll check who the other person that is in tension with. But the contention there is this: the one person is saying we must now. These people are imposing a law on us in terms of how much livestock we are allowed to keep, how much livestock they allow us to keep, right? And so we're going to lose this livestock anyway. So I think we should sell this livestock and turn it into capital. It sounds like no house in embryonic form, right?
I mean, it was Msimang. You know, what they do most, they give you a plot. This thing of a plot of 1,000 square meters, 500 squares, which is praised today, is really foreign to us. Because with 1,000 square meters and a stand, there's no way you're going to do reasonable farming, can you? Now, what Msimang discovered here in KwaZulu was that people were now limited to 10 cows in the betterment schemes because of their small sized yards. And he felt that this was unsustainable and that some of that livestock was going to die. So he felt that it needed to be converted into cash. But Champion was uncomfortable with that because he was afraid that if Isikwama Sesizwe, their fund, was encouraging people to sell their cattle, then they could be perceived to be playing into the colonial agenda. So it was a really, really tough decision-making process.
But there's another layer to that, right? Is the Group Areas Act that further disorganizes this agency. Can you reflect about that as well?
So I mean, because we're in Durban, and we must also talk about women also. You see, there's a lady that I write about, Mam Betham Kize. She had a tailoring business here in the market, not far from Victoria Street. She had studied as a teacher. She had studied at Ohlange, John Langalbalele Dube School. She had become a teacher, but felt that teaching was not enough, and then starts a tailoring business with Corim Kize, his brother. And they start cutting cloth. Now, Corey had been trained in Cape Town, and he was cutting for Indian merchants in the market. So when he learned a lot there, he decided to branch out with Mampetham Kize. They start this thing. They do tailoring. But what happens? In the 60s, the Durban receiver then says, sorry, you cannot operate in the cities anymore. Move out of the city. Of course, then you kill access to markets, don't you? And Mampetham Kize was a treason trialist. Can you imagine a business and also responding to a treason trial? People like Betham Kize, Mampetham Kize, give us examples of the sophistication of being an ANC member and still being a legit business person. I mean, you can never imagine the ANC without a petite bourgeoisie. So what the book does is to try and broaden the insight and say, hold on, the people that have become businessmen today that are ANC members, can you imagine if they were not wasted on Robben Island or in exile? Perhaps these guys would have been in Silicon Valley. So we've got to disabuse ourselves of this narrative that you are a business person because you are ANC. Actually, people are business people because they are white in certain instances.
Okay, I'm live. All right. So there's an interesting character here by the name of Godlo.
Yes.
Ne? Who was a key member of the AAC. And I want you to reflect on the AAC. And Mapikela had been making representations about trading rights in the 1930s. In 1934, they had visited the Secretary of Native Affairs in Cape Town to deal with the same matter. 6 years later, not much had changed. In his 1940 motion to the NRC session in Pretoria, Godlo first lauded the Transvaal authorities for allowing Black people to trade among themselves, and then moved to lament the attitude of the Orange Free State municipal establishments. Godlo had been grossly irritated by the fact that Black people were reduced to hawkers. Speaking to his motion, he said, "These people only have the right to sell produce for consumption on the premises, but they have not got the right to sell produce that has to be consumed off the premises. The result we submit, and I hope we are not betraying our people if we present the facts as they are. The result, I say, is that illicit trading is taking place in all the locations where ordinary trading is not allowed. I say that deliberately. Illicit trading is the outcome of the present conditions of affairs in the Free State. Is this one of the draconian ways in which these laws turn us into criminals?"
Correct. So, I mean, in KZN lingo, there's Kal, every state. really Black people faced the full might of oppression. Now, Mapigela and many of them, Godlo, champion himself, they were members of a Native Representative Council, which was started in 1935. And the reason why that Native Representative Council was started was because Black people lost their vote. You'll remember that in the non-racial constitution of the 1850s, Black people, if they had land and had shown some form of wealth, could vote, especially in the Cape Colony. But in 1935, they lose the vote and they are given the Native Representative Council, which Governor Mbeki said was a toy telephone, because what it did is the Native Representative Council voted for white people who would then represent Black people in Parliament. So it was a toy telephone, as Governor Mbeki. But but we must never ever dilute the importance of the Native Representative Council. You've got to understand the circumstances in which the native then was living under. It was either nothing or a quarter loaf of bread. That's what we've got to appreciate. And through the Native Representative Council, they were able to put some pressures so that Black people could trade in certain areas. The Free State was certainly seen, or the townships in the Free State were certainly seen as dormitories for labor. Black people were not allowed to start businesses there because the townships were dormitories. But through such activism, trade continued. But of course, they were hammered. There's Carl, Mapigela, who was educated in the late 1800s at the native section of St. Andrews in Grahamstown. He learned what is this thing? Carpentry and building. Mapigela, before these draconian laws, used to supply desks, school desks and chairs to Grey Bloom. But of course, when people cannot compete, they then sideline the native. He built kists, he built coffins, he was a builder, he had guest houses. Mapigela, by the way, he's a businessman, and he was the first speaker of the ANC in 1912.
All right.
And he played tennis.
Yeah.
And he played cricket. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some illustrious characters. Yeah, one of them, I think one of them was a musician as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I want us to get to an optimistic point, okay? So that we can open up to Q&A and hopefully draw to a close. And perhaps I will give you a chance to reflect on some of the way forward, because I think, as I said, this is an appraisal, and I think we can wallow in it, but we can also draw from it a better and mature and systemic reading of our history, and how to pivot from that into the kind of future that we want. But I think for me, for the audience tonight, what is important is something that we discussed earlier around vocabulary. Something that Dr. Loaz Lushabo likes to say. He likes to say, who is responsible for crafting the concepts and categories by which we interpret our own reality? What kind of vocabulary should we be using? We're now reflecting on a BMF of today that you can somehow, in many ways, compare to an NRC, if you look at the way we interact with social partners and business and politicians and so on. What kind of vocabulary should this book inspire amongst us as Black professionals?
Sure, it's a highly charged intellectual question. And I'm just a journalist. I'm not a professional. I'm just a tradesman. You know, I named the book Native Merchants intentionally. And two white professors, one from UCT and one from Oxford, says, but really this thing of a native is problematic. I then say, but to who? You know, because this is my own book. You know, not yours, it's mine. I think it is our own responsibility to shape how we are defined as Africans. And Native Merchants is that modest attempt, but not to be defined by concepts, but to be defined through deeds, right? One of the lessons that you'll get from the book is that, you know, if you look at mining, for you to understand the mining charter, which many people say barriers to doing business, nonsense, rubbish. In 1867, when there was a big rush to Kimberley, where were the natives? They were also they had shovel in hand, pick in hand. The fourth diamond is found by a Korana woman, a Khoi woman. It's a 61 carat. She sells it for 300 pounds, right? And it makes it to the Lilienfield brothers in England, and it's sold for thousands of pounds, right? Black people were mining in Kimberley until in 1875, an incompetent group of white insurgents from England then say the cost of the ticket from England is too costly for us to compete with natives who have a lower lifestyle. What nonsense is that? Because people cannot compete. They come with all sorts of racism. And that's how we lost mining licenses. We were mining, actually. And if you think about the losses that we had in Kimberley, because the capital that was made in Kimberley was the capital that was used on the Witwatersrand. There are a lot of surnames that emerged from that capital. If you read such things, you soon understand why things such as the mining charter are important, because Black people were not just wallowing, right, waiting for the white man to employ them. Actually, the notion of a Black proletariat is unknown. It is voluntary, right? But here's another lesson. You've got a number of merchants here, which we cannot go through. People must buy the book. We've just touched 10% of them now. There's still a 90% here. There's a gentleman called Paul Qiniwe. I don't like this riches to rags to riches thing because it's anthropology, you know. But he comes from nowhere. He builds a hotel in 1894 in King Williamstown for 2,000 pounds, right? He goes to England through a choir to try and raise money so that they could build a university, but they are swindled by a European promoter who steals the ticket sales, of course. You know, they specialize in heists, mugging the Black people. Now, anyway, passes on in 1902. I think living about, I do mention it in the book, his estate, I think gross was about 6,000 pounds. His estate, 6,000 pounds, 1902. The wife takes over from 1902, Ellie Notliniwe. She runs this thing so well, and she passes on in 1919 and adds some assets, of course. But when she passes on, the children are not interested. Now, there is a problem that besieges Black business, which I think the BMF must grapple with. It's the issue of management control in Black-owned businesses. If my son is not interested in participating in a media enterprise, I must be able to go out and say, Ace, can you intervene as lead independent director? And this boy will just be a board member with voting equity interests, but management control must sit elsewhere. That has consistently hit us. And I think the Black Management Forum must really take this thing very seriously, because if you look at any Black business, if there are 50 taxis, the moment the father dies, you give it 5 years and it's gone, because the children are either not interested or they cannot run this thing. Now, here's my biggest fear, so that I can pause. You've had a lot of companies that were started in 1994, 1995, so-called Black economically empowered businesses. When you go to their websites, beyond the founders, you do not see any management layers. Now, for me, that spells doom. I don't want my grandchildren, if I'm going to have one, to be discussing BE in 2094. But it's going to be an embarrassment if in 2094, we do not have a Black-owned company that was started in 1994. NASPAS was started in 1914. It is the largest company on the JSE today. I think the Black Management Forum must really consider this thing. Mvela Panda does not exist. Shanduka does not exist, by the way. It was captured into Pemba, and maybe people have got options to buy back, I don't know. I'm worried who's next. New Africa Investments Limited, NAIL, does not exist. What next? Do yourself a favor, go and check. The only person that seems to be, or people that seem to be getting it right, I think the Whiphold women, and you should see the planning, the Whiphold women have some layers of management there, Gloria Serobe and Louisa Mugela. Patrice Mutsipe has some layers of management. I worry, you guys can go and do the research by yourselves to see how succession planning is being managed there. And I think the PMF needs to consider forwarding one of its competent managers, not just to SOEs and white-owned businesses, but to the Black startup businesses. Thank you.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I think that if we came here for a valid vision, that was it, you know. That was the it moment in the dialogue today. There's an organization called African Family Firms that has begun a kind of a scientific approach to the research into these kinds of questions. But again, this will get now, and I'm quite familiar with the business families that you talk about. I don't see them being forthcoming with their data on those family dynamics that determine that management structure and so on. But I think the message being said to the BMF here is that if we do not recognize those very same African family firms as essential levers in buttressing these efforts that we are making in trying to transform this economy, we are actually wiggling in quicksand, essentially. And there seems to be this thing where once people have made it, they remove themselves completely from the organization that is supposed to be facilitating a concerted development of the community towards sustainability, right? Once people get to an unabated consumption lane, there's nothing you can stop them or call them to account in terms of how many jobs they've created through the transactions that they were able to do on government contracts or even on private enterprise. So we have not been able in the last 25 years to make Black business as accountable as white business in our efforts to make South Africa more equitable. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to give him a round of applause and open to the floor. I'll take hands if there are comments, questions. The objective, as I said, is to purchase the book. You will realize that we did have quite an extensive and belabored discussion, but really, he's done an extensive job of putting together many names and many biographies into what is a coherent narrative. And that is a very difficult thing to do. It is a very difficult thing to even assess as a book reviewer. Indobana, whose story are you going to foreground and which one are you going to leave behind? Over to you, sir.
No, thank you very much, Bukhule here, Sipak. I think one of the most interesting points you raise is this notion of I'm first. And, you know, we see a lot of, we think we are first. And I think that the question that comes to mind for me is, you know, what happens to those stories? I think we hear about Luchakalash and Umvolf throughout our childhood, but what happens to these stories in the middle? So why are these stories not told? Why are these stories not part of our DNA, so that we can then say, oh, Tatum Kulu did this thing, so I'm not the first. I'm the Landelaum, you know. So I think for me that's the more critical question that I'm trying to find out is what happens to the stories? Why are they crushed? Why do we not know as scholared individuals? Or we think we are scholared individuals, I guess. Sure.
It's quite obvious why the stories are hidden, right? So that the native can always be inferior, right? There are problems with these stories, right? If any lawyer reads this thing, is going to say we need to go for repatriation tomorrow because there is a pattern of how the heist happened, how Black people were marked, right? There's a reason why it's hidden, because it introduces problems around repatriation. But we must never ever blame anyone for not recording the stories except ourselves. And that was my modest contribution. I hope I'll have more energy. I hope my wife will be patient with me again. She's been very patient with this, and I'll write another one. But the responsibility sits with us. The responsibility of documenting BMF history does not sit with the European, it sits with the people here. This institution is going to turn half a century soon. And the pandemic nearly wiped many people here. And the BMF could have been left without a narrative.
Modwen, you know, first of all, I think probably that I really need to congratulate you for what you've done, and I'm sitting here and I'm trying to understand in my mind as to what could have been happening in your own mind when you were busy, of course, trying to put together the puzzles as clearly as it shows that you've attempted to do so. And I really want to congratulate you on the piece of work that you've done. And me myself as a wannabe economist, and really I'm hoping that the type of work we can be able to contribute in the development of Black epistemology, and I think you've done that, and so that then I think I see your book in the same quadrant as the efforts that would have been done by Steve Biko in the book that I write what I like, and so that then we can be able as Black people to look at ourselves positively and with the history that actually we are putting here, so that then we can be able then to see the mirror that we have goodness within ourselves, and there is a history of goodness within Black people as well, so that we are not a failed people. And I think that's actually the narrative that has been sold out there, that what Black amounts to failure. And I think what you've done here is a piece of work that then reaffirms all of us as Black people. And really, I don't have a question, but other than to say congratulations, my brother. Thank you very much for the work that you've put.
Thanks a lot, my brother. I am truly humbled. Thanks a lot, and I appreciate it. I went through massive mood swings when I read the estates of people. First of all, you are pissed off by the sophisticated cursive writing, because you are reading letters that were written in the 1800s. It's difficult to decipher this thing. Some of the newspapers are now turning faint. And then you meet the dispossession of the native. It was emotionally draining. However, one had to keep calm to tell the story and not be involved. So that was the case. Thanks, my brother.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Program Director. Thank you to our guests for writing this book, Native Merchants. I think it's very reaffirming for us as Black people and Black merchants in this day of age. I wanted to ask you, in your research, post 1994, can you share with us some insights as to why Black business has not succeeded in South Africa as much as our white counterparts, considering that we are more than 85% in this country? Why is it that post 1994, Black business is not as successful as our white counterparts? And also, by the way, I'd like to invite you to the BMF in Tshwane. I think I'm going to take the liberty of speaking of for the whole MENCO to invite you to come and have your book launched in Tshwane as well. You'll be more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, my sister, and thank you for the gesture. I commit to honor it. Why is it that Black businesses have not been successful as white businesses post 94? The story of Black business post 1994 is still new. If you take wine, it's got to mature in the oak, and then it matures in the bottle. I think we have just harvested the grape. It's still very early. It's 25 years, it's still very, very early. But there is a reason why. I mean, when the economy opened, it benefited established businesses, right? Most Afrikaner business people were not billionaire before 94. And that is what the democratic South Africa did. Now, for those that were starting, it was just going to be difficult. Can you imagine someone who has been making money since the 1870s in Kimberley, selling insurance since 1918, or whoever, right? You can't run as fast as them come 1994, because 1994 is not a situation where we all press pause and we say, let's start from the beginning. No, people are coming with capital. And of course, BE is a strategy that is also used to not encourage the creation of organic Black businesses. Management control that is Black is wholly consumed in white established businesses, and I am part of those people, sadly.
Thanks, Pakamisa. For me, I love what you said about oral history and us, narrating our own story. And for me, it's important in this whole context of land ownership in the country. Because when I read the headlines of Media 24, it says Shoprite lost 1.3 billion from looting. But we don't see headlines that says what did Black South Africans lose from the looting that occurred centuries ago that deprived us from our mineral rights, our land rights, our ability to freely trade? And then the issue of reparation comes to mind. To say, well, if the Jews were compensated for the Holocaust by the Germans, then surely we should be compensated for the land theft and the looting that happened centuries ago as Black people living in this country. And I then ask myself why it is that as Black people ourselves, we are against a basic income grant, when it was the very looting that put our people in this position of depravity and deep-rooted poverty and hunger and unemployment. I don't know where my question is in all of that. Sorry.
I mean, I'll focus on the reparations. The PMF has a litigation fund. I heard. I think they can. You guys can pursue that. I mean, triple B is not reparations; it is co-option. You guys have got to think about it in your conference, whether you want to set a reparation civil suit. Many of the houses are still there that were involved in the looting. Many of the companies are still there. I think that is for the BMF delegates to design, but you are raising something very important, DP. You are actually reminding me of a character by the name of Zwarte Maria, Black Maria. She is of a West African enslaved family. She's in the text. She was farming on what was now called Camps Bay in Cape Town. This is in the 1600s. Yeah, when her family bought their freedom from slavery. Now, can you imagine you are Black, you have to buy your freedom? That's where perhaps some reparations might need to start. We had to buy this freedom, had to die for this freedom. It was not handed over.
Of course, she also had some white slaves on her farm, although she was Black. Interesting.
White employees and Black slaves.
Yeah. Oh, okay, my bad. Sorry, guys. Okay. So, and then we're gonna try and take some from the virtual platform because there are questions on the virtual platform as well. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, colleagues, and thank you to you, Program Director. It's interesting that a former professional from the media is in here because I'm sure all of us are closely following all the interesting discussions going on about the medias. Moreover, Media 24, moreover, the independent media house. So it's interesting to have you here. Hopefully you could have shared some secrets with us as well on that. Secondly, to me, I have not read the book, but from the summary, it will seem a sum of African entrepreneurs. From there, elites crop up, more specifically Black elites. Within the academia, elites have always been an interesting discussion. Going way back, moving to the formation of the African National Congress. They have been an interesting topic because of the way they influence how organizations and times move. Elites became a very interesting subject in the formation of the African National Congress. to the addition of Black elites, which were never really discussed. Prior to that, it was only limited to the white elites. And then lastly, you have raised an interesting issue on why are so many Black or African businesses not sustainable or not going more on an ongoing basis. They're short term. I think it's a great opportunity for us as an organization in our strategic planning to seriously consider two options. One, to say, how do we influence the policy of the decision makers in terms of creating sustainable framework policies that will support the Black businesses. That's the first option. Then the second option, in line with one of our strategic objectives, is to say, how do we support them? Because those to me are two different. The other one is short term, the other one is long term. Thank you, sir.
My brother, I don't think I need to respond to that. You know, you've dropped mic, but I'm not a director of any media company that you've mentioned. So I do not have access to minutes.
I did ask him if he's going to be a member of the BMF yet, now that he's out of the media and he can afford to not be impartial. Andy, can we hear from the people in the virtual platform?
So there's no comments here. The first comment is from Jerry, my editor of the blog. He says Mr. Zamela deserves the high praise for the depth of research that has gone into this book. I trust that he has opened the door for further research. I trust that he has opened the door for further research into an area of our history and its present ramifications. So that's the first one. And the second one is from Ms. Pokazi Jojo. She says succession planning is imperative to generational wealth. And then the last comment is from Utembeka Semani. He says he doesn't know how to put this in English, but he's also Gagayo Unyana Montana. Thank you.
I am honestly humbled, and I think I wouldn't have received those comments had the leadership of the BMF and the delegates here allowed me to sit here. I am humbled. I've always been a friend of the BMF, and I think nothing stops me if I'm presented with a form. Langa is smiling because he has been fighting this thing, for the past many decades, and Nomlala has been trying to push me in Cape Town, and I've been dodging, but I shall commit. I shall download.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our night. I think that there's one more question. Oh, call it that. Over to you. Okay, and now Niki.
I want to do a follow-up question on what Papama raised earlier on the issue on the issue of vocabulary. I've scribbled something here because this is something that has been on my mind for a very long time.
Just put it close to your mouth.
Okay. This is something that I've been thinking about for some time, and it worries me. So this is the question. I've scribbled something like, can a people with a vocabulary, a foreign vocabulary, a foreign vocabulary, but they do not have the grammar, reshape themselves. How can, it continues, how can organization like the BMF, or does the responsibility lie with the state to create the grammar? I want to give you two scenarios. One, the Africana University, established recently. And the second one is the Orania Cooperative. I want to say to you that both of them are based on not only the vocabulary, but on the grammar.
These are, you know, Lungile, these are really sophisticated questions for a lay newspaper man, you know, like me, you know. I am honestly trying to comprehend, because it's a serious issue, and I don't want to just mumble a response. I would need to apply my mind over some Pinot Touch grapes. But thank you very much. Yes, we must commend what the Afrikaners have done. If you look at the Burger, which is now NASPA, started in 1914, they were emphasizing their vocabulary and grammar using those platforms. But black people did it before, right? So we also ought to be careful about lionizing this Afrikaner success story, right? Because it never had hurdles in history. Actually, they were repatriated, they were paid, they were recompensated for the losses after 1902 in the Anglo-Boer War. I think what we ought to be aligning that narrative that we are pushing is, what is it that we are doing to support a Sizwe Nxasana has built a black-owned institution, educating black people, trying to do what you are mentioning. Chinezi Chijioke has also done, and there are many of them, right? Black auditing firms and so on. What is it that we are doing, rather than critiquing and comparing it, always comparing it to the old Dutch project? But
Yeah. Let's take it offline, Tata. Yeah.
The issue here is not the comparison. The issue I'm raising is the grammar. The issue I'm raising is the grammar. What is
I've got an intervention for you. The BMF has got a resolution around an African management curriculum, right? And he's demonstrated tonight for all of us that this session was powerful enough to convince him that the BMF is an organization that he can belong to, because this kind of engagement does take place in the BMF. And so if we want to look at what membership looks like in the BMF, it needs to look as irritating as these discussions and how long drawn out they might seem. But in fact, they are supposed to be empowering us for a better reading of ourselves on one hand, right? So I'm saying, to the question of grammar and vocabulary, we need to put it on the agenda of that African management curriculum and maybe bring him in as one of the lecturers on unpacking that, because we've got an instructive text here, right? We've got an instructive text in the work, in the biography of General Holomisa. We've got an instructive text in the book of Ayabonga Tawe. We've got an instructive text in the work of Tembeka Ngcukaitobi, which was launched by another BMF branch, you see. So the canon exists, but until now, there has not been a deliberate agenda by Black people themselves to say a Sizwe Nxasana starting a school is something that we must buttress, right? Even us, we are in the BMF, we're saying we need to be entering the school education stage. You had those President's Award schemes and those programs. Why can't we have a BMF going into a high school and developing that kind of insight at that level? In that book, Ka Holomisa, he highlights a BMF personality in Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, right? As being the person who went beyond the boundaries of the curriculum that was set for the school and sought to expose his students to something broader of a worldly kind of existence, right? There's nothing more tangible than that. There's nothing sophisticated in what those Afrikaners are doing at Don Tech. It's as simple as that. And the point here being made is that the resources are here and the people are here and they call themselves members of this. But the question is, do they spend time in what being a member is on this, right? Okay, last question for the day.
That man must join BMF also. He cannot just come and ask us difficult questions. He's not a member, but he sells good books. He must join.
Over to you, so we're closing it after you.
Okay, no, thank you very much. It's a bit of a challenge to be the person who asked the last question. Okay, no, thank you very much for deliberating on your book. I think it's a very good thing. It also can to help us. Some of us will try by all means to read. But my question is with regard to the system that's in place. As you indicated earlier, that when it comes to us Africans, we don't have a standardized or a system that's sustainable for future. So I'm taking this back to, okay, the book that you shared with us here. But if you look, there's this thing that it's with us, where we've got this thing that even white people, they will say to us that, no, if you want to hide something from a Black person, put it inside a book. So my question is around that, where I'm not saying that maybe after this gathering, we're all going to pass away, but I think we are on another side of the age where, to us, if we have information or we have got the knowledge, often you find that, you know, we don't transfer it to the young ones. And now with regard to what is happening, you find that the young people, they use social media. They don't want to read. So how then do we ensure that they have interest in reading from an early age? Because if we have this knowledge and we don't actually start it from a young age, I think it also continues with that trend that as we aging, the gap is still going to continue, that, you know, there will be gap where young people or the young ones won't have this knowledge that we have. Then maybe perhaps maybe as a journalist or as a person who writes, how then can you integrate and also maybe have initiatives that can ensure that young people, they read? Because if they don't read, it will continue this trend that if you want to hide a thing for a Black person, put it inside the books.
No, thanks. That's a very important point that you make, my brother. And we've got to produce literature in a manner that can be consumed by the new generation. New generation is not consuming music through cassettes. They're consuming it through digital platforms, right? So what is it? My dream is to get this thing to be on Netflix. or Showmax, and you can have, that's my dream. That's my dream. I think they like visual things, but it has to start with us. We must read and transfer the knowledge to the next generation.
Okay, because he's joined the BMF already, he has already made special requests. So I will grant him this membership privilege. Over to you, Sisi, because he's now asking that we allow you. So I can declare there's a match fixing here.
Thank you. Thanks, PK. This is so inspiring. I think, I'm not sure if I want you to answer the question now or anyone to answer the question now, but I want to say the elephant in the room in South Africa is the call for restitution. And I don't mean land, I mean restitution. We need to go through acknowledging truthfulness, forgiveness, and we need to give back that which was taken. And that's the elephant in the room. And you said BE is a corruption. So we keep skating around the issue. And your book makes me think, what is the construct of restitution in the context of business?
So are you going to answer that now?
I think the BMF must really engage on this thing. But having said that, I think Native Merchants provides a lot of case studies on why restitution remains important if we are to sustain this country.
Okay, the president is going to come onto the stage and he's going to give a thank you. In tradition, I must end off with the final excerpt from the text, President, as you come up. With all that's been discussed today, one of the key things to recall here is Lendi Tetwayo about these businesses are post-94 and whether they're going to exist tomorrow, right? And I want to say that as the BMF adopts this onto its discussion list, I want us to remember a character by the name of Stephen Sonjika. We are on page 99 of the book, and I'm going to end here, and the president is going to come up. Another illuminating story about the seriousness of Black people in commercial farming was that of Stephen Fani Sonjika, an agriculturalist in the Eastern Cape and a treasurer of the Native Farmers Association. Stephen Sonjika from Kanda, Middle Drift, grew up under farming conditions as his parents loved stock raising. As a boy, Sonjika would be severely reprimanded when he plowed too harshly, with his father cautioning him not to kill his cattle. Growing up under such circumstances, Sonjika saw the benefits of proper cultivation and told his father he wanted to buy his own land. Buy land, exclaimed his father in horror. How can you want to buy land? Don't you know that all land is God's? And he gave it to the chiefs only. Sonjika later told his father he would leave the family household to secure his own land. His father was against this. Sonjika left his home and went to King Williamstown. He served as a policeman during the War of 1877 with 3 of his comrades. I'll end it there, Mhlekazi. Okay, and saves. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But you see the point I'm making, President, there is that the other tension that I saw mna Pakusonji is lento siyithetha succession planning. The environment at home is not conducive for him to live out this passion that he ayincance emabeleni kokwabo. Kufuneka ashiye indawo. Right? And so when we interrogate the state of the dismantling and disorganizing of Black enterprise, at some point we must also confront the family structure. President, over to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Reverend Derek.
Thanks, Pops. Let me not come in front and spoil the setup of the book. Look, colleagues, I want to, from the bottom of my heart and as the leader of PMF, to thank you, Nzamela, for agreeing to come and do this session. I know that I've spent a number of time with you. I know the computer that you wrote the book on. We enjoyed a couple of grapes together. But one thing that I want to say to the BMF members here is that throughout my term, I relied on your advice to lead the organization on many occasions. So what you write here and what you write about the responsibility we carry as leaders and as the BMF in particular in creating a picture and an environment where Black people can sustainably thrive is things we deliberated on. I'm very proud that the whole nation today, and I want to implore and thank you to the Tshwane chair or member of MENCO. I think, colleagues, we must take this book to all our branches to drive the message, to make sure that the narrative of where we come from is actually expressed by us. And it's a narrative that would give us a solid foundation to build from. There's a lot that has been written here, and every time I listen to these stories, similarly to when I was listening to Bandu Olomisa's book launch, Ayabonga and others, I worry about the nothingness of our generation. I worry about how serious we are about this country. We saw in the elections now that the ruling party is losing ground. The country is moving swiftly and softly and slightly silently in the hands of our people. And we can no longer claim those leaders to be our people because they've betrayed our cause. But the question is, who would be the merchants of the 1800s that will come out now? There's no slavery, there's no oppression. Where are we to lead this country? Where are we to take our people out of squalor of poverty? That remains the question that confronts us. Who will write a book about us 100 years from now? Are we doing enough to be worthy of being shared a story? Who would last beyond the weekend of his funeral amongst us? That remains a very concerning issue. I want to say to you, Nzamela, here, that I'll buy 25 of your books or 100 of your books. If it's gonna cost me 25,000, I'll buy 100 of your books. And I'll take each one of these copies and distribute one of each to the rural schools around the country, not just in the Eastern Cape. And I'll do that personally, especially if I happen to have a break in the next coming years. Thank you, colleagues.
Colleagues, thank you, President. Today is served, and I suppose Mr. Nzamela is here to sign books
I'm available now and I'm available tomorrow too.
Thank you. Colleagues, the session is now officially closed. Thank you. Thank you to the audience on the virtual platform. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.